Can I come in just on one thing about the Irish thing? Because obviously I push very heavily the marching bands, which is a loyalist thing. The Republicans have some marching bands, and they're universally awful. They're great at fiddle music and songwriting and so on. Marching bands, they're pathetic. But as I push those, it's fair and useful to push something from the other side. And you talk about the way in which, for the Irish, it was being their own and different, which enabled them to survive. It wasn't accidental. Ireland had obviously an ancient history, but things like, if you go to Ireland now, everywhere, every village, if you're going through the south of Ireland, everywhere, there's flags, a few of their own flags, but primarily in each county, there's county flags. And this is all about the Gaelic football and the hurling, especially. It's their games. And it's an enormous part of the power of their identity. And when that crazed Somalian was trying to hack the head off that fellow in Belfast the other month, the man who went to his aid did so with a hurling stick.
What you're about to watch is the censored version of this episode. Increasingly, the algorithm is becoming more and more hostile to the type of content I want to deliver. This is a fully independent channel which is contending with the real-world issues. If you'd like to support me and keep these talks alive, please head over to the Substack, where here and only here you'll find the full uncensored video. Alternatively, if you do want to watch the whole episode for free, you can find the censored version on Spotify. If you do watch it here, all I'd ask is please be sure to follow. Please be sure to give it a 5-star review. This really, really helps with the algorithm. Anyways, enough from me. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode.
Because in a very crude, simple way, they're an armed people, because they've got every young lad has got a hurling stick, which is quite a vicious weapon, especially when you know how to use it. They're far better armed than the English are. Who've got, if you've got a pea shooter, it's probably illegal. So anyway, that tradition of Gaelic football and hurling, which is a hugely important part of their cultural identity, this came about because in the early 19th century, the theorists of Irish nationalism, which is precisely people like you and me, and some of the people watching this, not the ordinary people, the theorists of it, said, look, we've got a problem here that all our youngsters in the street, they're playing football, soccer, and cricket and rugby. And these are garrison games. These are the games of the English. These are the games of the English upper class, in fact. These are the games whereby England turns people into Englishmen, to little Englishmen. And the only way we can preserve our Irish identity isn't just the language, in which incidentally really they failed in the end, unlike the Welsh. But one of the ways to do it, we need our own games. Because if our kids are playing our own games, they'll grow up to identify with our nation. So they more or less invented out of the history books. There were sort of references in the ancient Irish folk tales and so on to the game of hurling and stuff like that. They more or less reinvented these games, just like in the 19th century the Romantic, the Druids were reinvented, and the Welsh reinvented with the Eisteddfod and Druids and Standing Stones. It's a complete reinvention of Celticness and so on, but it became a very important institution. But in Ireland they took this idea and they reinvented these games, and they turned that into one of the key bastions of their identity, which, as you were told the other day, Justin Barrett, it's helped preserve them all that time. It'll preserve them longer as well. But the important thing to reiterate is that came about because a handful of serious nationalist intellectuals, instead of wasting their time with talking about how many men are we going to send to Westminster this time, got down with how the hell are we going to do things to make sure that Irish lads who are going to be born in 100 years' time grow up being Irish. How do we do it? We give them alternatives to the garrison games. There's a huge lesson there.
Yeah. I want to go back a little bit to something we were just touching on earlier. And like you were saying, we do have a heavily drugged up nation, but it's creating a lot of tension. The forcing of so many migrants in, not just these small little towns in Piddington, but what we are seeing just this awakening of the white man. Mm-hmm. He's finally getting his back up, which is causing a reaction with all the migrants too, which seems to be just accelerating. When they start to push back, they push back harder and so on. Yeah. Like you say, how much do you think the chance of a civil war might actually happen?
I think that there's different levels of civil war, and right. Professor Betts, who's pushing it, made this point that it's somewhere between a Northern Ireland level, which is scarcely a civil war. It's 3,000 dead in Northern Ireland out of a loyalist population of, what was it then, 800,000. Scale that up in Britain, it's an awful lot of corpses. But still, overall, it was more like civil disturbances than a rolling civil war. And if the English state had wanted to, they could have destroyed the IRA within a week. They didn't want to. We needn't go into that now. But that was still pretty bloody. It'll be somewhere between the two. But the minute you get, we saw it in 2001. Someone was pointing out to me the other day that it's 25 years since the Bradford and Oldham riots and so on. To me, they're like yesterday. But that's the way time goes. It's 25 years ago now, and we were so close in those riots to this ceasing to be just people against the police, or against, in the case of the Asians, against what they perceived to be a threat of a National Front incursion. It was nonsense even then. But they had in their head, they had a target which wasn't their neighbours. It was the Nazis, the racists, or the police. The same with the black riots of the 1980s, which I was also present at in Brixton and so on. And you weren't the enemy as a white person. You weren't wholly safe, but you weren't the enemy. The enemy was the police and white society in general. So in the Brixton riots, there were, towards the tail end of them, there were ghastly things when there were little gangs of blacks going in, breaking into yuppie houses and raping young women. But overall, that's not what those riots were about. In the riots in Oldham, it came within an inch of the two communities going head to head. But overall, it was the Asians fighting the police. But they were so close to it spilling over to the next level. And when you get the level in which it's one community trying to drive out the other, then it's pretty much unstoppable. There's enough police in Britain to control 2 or 3 of those. You get to 10 of those at the same time, and the police of Britain couldn't possibly control it. And 10 is only Burnley, Bradford, Halifax, Oldham. It's only a few places like that. It's entirely possible. So when it goes, it may not be a full scale civil war, but you're certainly going to see large numbers of internal refugees. Hundreds of thousands of our people moving very rapidly, and tens of thousands of their people moving very rapidly. And some deaths. So I think that's almost inevitable. The sheer, the unnatural state of our society, and the tensions of austerity and an AI crash and a serious depression just around the corner economically, right, let alone Mr. Betts and Mr. Robinson and so on actually trying to poke it and make things even worse. So I think it's going to happen. I think it would already have happened. Now in 1980s, and there were I was working with the National Front in Streatham at the time, and as this black mob on the third night of the rioting in Brixton came basically up Streatham Hill, they're about a mile apart, so heading out more into white South London in search of shops that hadn't yet been looted. There was a pub that we didn't used to use because it was mainly white soul boys used it, and it was anti-National Front. And from this pub came about 80 or 90 young men chanting, "The National Front is a white man's front, join the National Front." And they were coming out of there to confront the blacks who were moving to their area. And similarly in 2001 in Oldham and in Bradford as well, the white community were going to defend themselves. But in those days, the whites were the soft and the reticent and inclined to obey the police and not wanting to go out and cause trouble. And they weren't off their heads on coke. And the aggressive ones were the minorities. I think the only reason it hasn't gone bang already is that our minorities, Muslim Pakistanis included, are frankly pussified compared to what they were 25 years ago. They're softer. They're further away in generation terms from the very tough people who first came here, from tough peasant farms and all the rest of it, and the foothills of Afghanistan. So they're softer for that reason. They're softer because they've been drinking our water the whole of their lives, and God knows what's in our water. But when you look at the state of some of the so-called young men and some of the so-called young women, there's obviously things in the water that shouldn't be there. It affects them as much as us. So that's a problem. And most of all, 25 years ago, very few young Muslims went to university. Lots of them were leaving school at 16, 18 at most, and they were within their community, in their heads. Now there's more of them I come back to it, more of them go to university than us. About 80% of their girls go. which means all of them, they might go there wearing a hijab, they might come home wearing a hijab because otherwise their uncle will beat them to death. But while they're there, they are becoming completely westernized in every way, shape and form, including suddenly realizing that the sexual skills of the lads that they grew up with, which are non-existent because they think that shagging a 13-year-old who's terrified enough off her head on vodka is fun. They're actually finding, young, quite sophisticated white lads who know what a woman is for. So they're not wanting to go back to their community. And they're being, at the very least, they're coming out with a whopping great student debt. They have to go and get a career. You can't have a career and 6 kids. They don't work together. So they've got a problem there. But equally, 65% and heading upwards of their young men are now going to university, which I know of some fellas who've been through university and come out the other side, untouched. I did, but it was a different time then. But still, today, some come through it untouched. But generally, a decent young human being goes into university and a liberal zombie comes out the other end. And it's happening to the Muslims as well. There's a huge amount of homosexuality in that element of that community as well. Because they just go off and they go wild. That people are softer than they were. Now, they're still harder. They're better organised than our people. They're more aggressive than our people. They're more militant. They're more coherent than our people. So they're going to give us a hell of a shock when it does kick off. But overall, they're softer than they used to be, and our people are a hell of a lot tougher and harder and more aggressive and unreasonable than they used to be. So it's a recipe for all sorts of trouble, this. So, I think big trouble is going to be coming. When it comes, they would, of course, queue up to find little snippets and programs like this and blame thee and me. But it won't be our fault. They created this mess in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, when you actually do look at just how much has happened to us and how much we've been under attack, we used
how much
to
has
be
been done to us? It's not happened, is it? It's how much has been done to us? Because, like you say, we've been under attack all that time. You're right.
Yeah. No, exactly. And we've also been very complacent. I mean, modern life has made us all soft. But now that we're starting to understand the real game that we're in, people getting their backs up quickly. When you put people into this survival mode, I think there's going to be a completely different type of white man emerge.
I think it is. And you can add on to that the fact, again, coming just to the economics of it, I don't know, no one knows how big an impact AI is going to have on jobs and all the rest of it. It's somewhere between a temporary interruption, which then actually unleashes all sorts of new things, which if it was being run by a sensible government which had some controls, if it's controllable, be totally international, but if it was controllable by sensible people, it could perhaps deliver enormous boons to the nation and humanity generally. But given that it's not, it's probably going to, at least in the short term, it's going to devastate jobs like the spinning jenny through the skilled artisan, small farmers and so on, out of work in 18th, 19th century, early 19th century Britain. So it's going to at least have that. It could be far worse than that. And in particular, nearly all the graduate jobs, which have been the thing which have allowed middle-class youngsters to think, well, I know that's a shithole down there, but I can get out of that. I think they're all going. And they're probably all going in a very short space of time. 3, 4, 5 years, would you say? So on top of the physical and psychological things that so many young people, especially young men, now realise, like you said, we're under attack, we've been under attack and it's getting worse. And then you've got the crazies, in Labour saying we're going to make it even worse. And Nigel Farage saying, you know what, we need to replace all these dying Brits. We need Indians to come here. They'll work very hard. It'll all be great. So everyone's pushing this. I think when you add on to that, the fact that the jobs that people took for granted, the decent paid jobs that people took for granted, just aren't going to be there. Therefore, there's no point keeping your nose clean. What for? You've got your back against the wall. What do you do with your back against the wall? Sooner or later, people stand up and fight. And I think that's where we're headed.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And it's like, it is that realization of we are under attack. I don't think, it's not that I don't think. I know that our government isn't acting in our interests, right? And it's only going to accelerate. I think we're only going to see more and more migrants because they understand they've got to try and, this is how I see it anyway, they've got to try and finish the job quick. Otherwise, we will start to push back and there's a chance they lose control, which is why I'm always promoting people like the Woodlander, people like Return to the Land, because they offer a parallel society. They
Yes.
offer,
Yeah.
we can see this, the current society is not working in our interest. So we need to work and make our own society, which I think, you know, if you, in theory, if you had one of these, oh, look, there's no crime. Oh, no one's getting stabbed.
Mm-hmm.
No one's getting raped.
Yes.
You will see people start to like pile into these societies
Well,
like never before.
yeah, absolutely so. But just one thing there, that there's you're almost there at, it's not a nationalist heresy, it's a nationalist error. People think in terms of a community as being something that we have to build. It's just us. It's not the case. A community is actually out there. It's already there. We have to be part of it and influence it. If you build something, the Americans had this in particular. You build something which is, you know, a little a consciously white enclave, and all the Zionist liberal lawfare criminals will pile in on it with class actions and so on. One, to close it down. Two, to use it as a fundraising operation for their bigoted thing. And three, because there's money in it, because you can take the wealth of people and, you know, and steal it. So they're vulnerable like that. What our people need particularly to do is to be building our own communities. Now, part of the problem with that is idealistic middle class youngsters and so on, who are brought up with everything's reasonably civilized, and you go into a rough estate. Say what, you know, what is this? Because it's rough, you know, because the Duke of Wellington used to say he doesn't know what the British Army did to the enemy, but they certainly scared him, and that was only he was allowed to hang and flog them to keep them in order, you know. So these are quite rough communities. They didn't used to be rough; they've been made brutally rough. Now I'm working at present on a project to encourage people. If you live in northeast England or whatever, stay there. It's safe. If you live on the edge of London, Birmingham or whatever, get the hell out with your young family, because in all sorts of ways it isn't safe. Where do you go? So I know there's lots of people who've been saying, well, you know, I'm off to Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, looking at Cambodia, Thailand or whatever. This is potentially an English diaspora which just disappears. No good. So where can people go? Just go to Northern Ireland. If you're actually seriously worried and you want to be somewhere more traditional, go to Northern Ireland, because they've got a demographic problem building up there as well. The loyalist birth rate's as bad as ours. The Catholics are one generation behind because they avoided the pill for one generation, but they're heading the same way as well. So if you want to find an electrician, plasterer, car mechanic in Northern Ireland, a good one, you'll find a huge wait because there's not enough to go around. So if you've got a skill like that, you can go to Northern Ireland. Property prices at present are 68% of what they are on the mainland, much cheaper than they are in southern England, because of the demographic problem emptying out West Belfast. Any prod with Get Up and Go is getting up and going and leaving the Short Strand and Sandy Row and all the rest of it. Sorry, not Short Strand. That's the other side, the Shankill Road, Sandy Row. They're leaving there, so it doesn't take that long. I was speaking just the other day with a fella from edge of Birmingham. He and his family, they live in the Sandy Row now. It didn't take that long to get a council house, you know, and a council association housing, because there's not a huge waiting list, and Africans and Asians aren't being poured in there to take them all. And he said, I'm not the only one. There's quite a collection of Black Country and Birmingham people, Brummies, living now just in the Sandy Row, small area of northwest Belfast. And they're all making sure, the loyalists think they're great, because they just see them as this is, you know, reinforcements of people who are on our side. They're essentially unionists, they're British patriots, and they're all of them making sure that their kids are joining the local bands, so they're becoming part of the local community. And even if people only go there to look at it and see, there's rough estates there. And this comes back to the question of, you know, the future, and you were talking about, you know, there's no crime. Well, there is crime in those estates, because there's a damn sight less, because a rough estate in Northern Ireland has a physical presence of men who, their power in that community, and some of them, they run drugs and stuff like that. The paramilitaries are by no means saints, but their power in the community comes from local people understanding without them, the community would be weaker. With the result that if someone is twacking cars or vandalising their neighbours' garden sheds or whatever, they will get a knock from someone from the paramilitaries to say, stop that. One warning, stop it. The carry on doing it, they get their legs broken with baseball bats. It's brutal, but not many get their legs broken with baseball bats, because the roughest estates in Loyalist Northern Ireland are nothing like as rough as many estates that our communities had to live with in England, because those communities police themselves. And those are the places that nationalists who are serious need to get into, where you go into the people, and once you're there, an attack on you, an attack on a Woodlanders thing is an attack just on them. And all the rest of the British people look and think, perhaps that's rather unfair, but perhaps they're a bit extreme. Whereas if you're doing these things, community patrols, for instance, or developing a community charity shop in an area, and I'm working at present right now with a number of places where these things are starting, especially the community patrols, then I've got around with them. Those people, they're not outsiders, they're people within the community. And you walk down a street with the leaders of these, and everyone's saying, oh, wonderful, great stuff, keep it up. So attack that, and you're attacking the whole community. And at that point, the attack, instead of becoming a problem for us, is actually a problem for them, by which I mean the powers that be. So that's where we need to go with that. So, yeah, there's a role for, and certainly with things like the Woodlanders, there's a role for having a special place. And there's great work also. I don't know if you know the Basket Weavers?
No, not familiar. Basket
Weavers is a group, it's a very serious group of younger men. They started as the followers of, what's his name, Pavini, who's a very, very good, I think he's probably an Iranian. He does some really good academic agent, really good YouTube videos and so on our wavelength, but something as an outsider. And it started off a group of admirers of him who've gone into the real world, and they're consciously working to help each other set up businesses and trade with each other and things like that, and publish books and things. Very, very good. There's so many. I think that even those of us in the nationalist struggle, perhaps it's because we're in the nationalist struggle, we tend to be blinkered and only looking at the nationalists who are vaguely within our milieu. And in fact, there's huge numbers of young men, especially, who've already realised that our milieu has largely been a crock of shit, and they're actually doing things out on their own, in small groups and bigger groups. And it's really something, it's very, very heartening. There's a lot of great stuff going on out there.
Yeah, well, you see, like there's these regular walks which people are going on as a community. I see this a lot in Ireland. I see this in Scotland now.
Yep.
So, and it is just starting to bind people together. It's building that community, very tight knit, and it's starting to make migrants actually scared, which it should do, because they've been allowed to get away with murder.
Well, now, I can imagine it is, but on what basis do you base that assumption or that statement?
I mean, you can just feel the tension with them, that they've kind of been given a free ride for the longest time. And now they're actually starting, like you see people like Mohammed Hijab, for example, start to call out the far right and say like, well, I understand you feel like you're getting replaced, but let me tell you, if you keep going, we're going to have trouble. They're nervous. I can kind of feel this in the air a little bit.
I've seen that, say, from some of the stuff that Five Pillars, the hardline Muslims, put out. There was an enormous confidence there, and now there's concern. It's a defiant concern, but there is a concern. I remember back when the British National Party won the little Millwall seat in 1993, and there was an opinion poll done a few days later. I think it said something like 1/3 of all immigrants living in Britain are now considering having to leave. One council seat in a place so abnormal that until recently, at that point, it had used to elect Communist Party members to represent it. So a thoroughly abnormal place, and all of a sudden, bang, it was scaring people. And I think now, I pick it up as well. I just wonder where you got it from, that it is feeding into these people feeling uncertain and threatened. And the obvious response to that is to band together and to organise to defend themselves. And then you're one incident away of their very organised defence clashing with our rather disorganised, desperate offence, and then they won't put the lid back on that.
Yeah, and unfortunately then it would just kind of be a numbers game, which we will always have the upper hand because this is our land, right? But yeah, So do you think that Northern Ireland is actually maybe a better strategy than, say, the Woodlander?
No, it's a different strategy, or it's in a way, it's a different strand of the same strategy. I'm not saying, all of these things are worth doing, and they're also all a damn sight more worth doing than continuing to watch the Westminster show.
So if you made it this far, firstly, thanks very much. If you'd like to support me and keep these talks alive, please head over to the Substack, where here you can find the full uncensored video. Make sure to stay up to date and follow all the other accounts too. The goal is to build a community of like-minded people, both online and in person. If you're interested in being part of that, please feel free to reach out. I'm mostly available on Substack, Instagram, and Telegram. I'll leave a link for all of that in the description below. On top of that, if you do want to watch the whole episode for free, please head over to Spotify. All I'd ask is make sure that you follow and make sure you give it a 5-star review. This really, really helps with the algorithm. For those watching in the UK and are concerned about what's happening, make sure to reach out. It's becoming very, very clear that we don't have time to wait for politics to come save us, especially when we can be saving ourselves. Hope to see you next time. All the best.